Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Nicole and I'm going to be wrapping up the month of October, talking about what I read during the month of October and giving you an update on all the different little reading challenges and that kind of thing that I am participating in. So let me go ahead and get started because I've got a lot to go through, including a book review. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the book review. I finished one more book in the month of October other than the other ones that I've talked about on a weekly basis, and that would be The Hearing Trumpet by Leandra Carrington. This is a book that I buddy read with my friend Britta, and I will link her channel and her review or her video that includes this book review in it. We had a really good time reading this book. I think more because we had a good time reading it together than the book itself, which wasn't a bad book, but it was an interesting one, and it was kind of a funny one to be our first buddy read. So let me go ahead and tell you about this book. This is a work of fantasy that has magical realism in it. I would almost say, to me, it felt more like literary fiction that contained magical realism in it. But I don't know. It was definitely a different style of fantasy, very much different than the genre of fantasy and how fantasy today tends to be written, which makes sense because this book was published in 1974. This book is about Marion Leatherby, who is a 92-year-old woman who lives with her family, is toothless and a bit hard of hearing, but she's going about her life just minding her business when her bestie Carmilla one day decides to gift her a beautiful hearing trumpet so that she can really hear what's going on around her and maybe snoop on those whippersnapper kids of hers. So Leonora does so only to discover that her kids have come up with a plan to send her off to a home for elderly people to get taken care of there so that they can go on with their busy lives. And Leonora gets sent off to this home for the aging that's really kind of this funky occult wellness center where all the different little homes that people live in look like they're straight out of nursery rhymes. There's witches, murder, and passages to the underworld, like, you tend to find in those situations. This book covers a variety of different topics as Marion tries to make her way in this new environment. There is discussion of aging, friendship, isolation, and self-empowerment, and they all come at you in very bizarre ways and timing and are discussed to varying extents. And I'm just laughing to myself because this book really is as strange as it sounds, and maybe even stranger than I'm making it sound, to be honest. There were some good highs in this book. The humor in this book was spot on. There were some really bizarre moments, and there were even moments that it seemed kind of like heavy and serious, except that somehow Leonora Carrington was able to inject just the right amount of humor into each of the situations that there were times where I found myself almost about to laugh out loud. It was, for the most part, a pleasure to read because of that humor. One of the strong things in this book are definitely the characters. There is a whole host of characters. They're all unique and fascinating and weird and strange and lovable, for the most part, in their own way, and each has something that you just can't help but like about them. I think my personal favorite and Britta's was Carmilla, which was Marion's bestie, who always knows, or at least has an idea of what the latest paranoid conspiracy is that's going on, but don't worry, she's got a plan to fix it. That said, there were definitely lows in this book for me as well. I think one of them for me definitely surrounded the pacing of the book. For the most part, the pacing was really good, but it wasn't consistent. The beginning of the book starts out at a pretty, expected, anticipated pace, and then it switches to a really long letter within a letter within a letter at one point, and the pacing just slows down. You just become stuck in this weird interior world that maybe the book comes back to, but as far as Britta and I could tell, it didn't. And so then we felt like we had to slog through this middle section of the book, which I figured out was about 20% of the book, that didn't really end up having any point to it later on. And then you get to the end of the book, which, as Britta described it, was just a wild roller coaster of a ride. In fact, it was pretty funny for me because I finished this book on audiobook because I was traveling and I had 2 hours left to my trip. I turned it on and finished the book in those 2 hours. And the amount of stuff that happened in those 2 hours of the drive, I don't know that I will ever forget that part of my drive. So maybe that's a high. I don't know. But we both struggled with the way the book was paced and even plotted to some extent. We just felt like certain parts of the plot were held onto for way too long, and other events were not given their due, or at least that's what it felt like. I also found myself wishing that there were certain themes that she as an author, Leonora Carrington, had delved deeper into, but I felt like she would mention something that I thought was a really profound thought or moment to be expressed in the book, and then we'd just skip on. Like, there was a whole moment of like self-identification or self-renewal or something along those times, and we just coasted right past it. Unfortunately, that type of storytelling really didn't work well for me. Despite all that, I did still give the book 4 stars. I feel like it fell somewhere between 3.5 and 4 stars for me personally, but I feel like I should give the book a 4 star because I do think this is a book that some people would like better than I did, especially if you like absurdism or whimsy in your fantasy and you like fantasy that falls on the side of magical realism. I have discovered that while I can like aspects of magical realism, it can be very hit or miss as to whether or not it actually works for me in a particular book. And in this one, I didn't feel like it necessarily did. I think this would be a book that would also be good for someone who just likes to think about scenes in books and find their own meaning and is okay and comfortable if the book itself doesn't give you that meaning or have a very clear theme or message. There was some theme and messaging in this book, but like I said, it just wasn't sort of grasped and held onto for any length of time. So that is my review of this, and yeah, you could give it a try if any of that sounds good to you. It's not a particularly long read, and there is an audiobook if that's your preferred method of reading. The next book I'm going to talk about in brief will be Clarissa. This is my year-long read that I am doing and hosting on the Story Graph. We are almost done. At this point, I am on page 1,474 out of 1,499. And yes, I could just finish this book. However, this is an epistolary, and I am reading this book and working through it by reading the letters on the day that they are dated. And so the last letter in this book is dated December 10th. So somehow those last 25 pages are going to be dragged out for another month and change. One of the ways that it's happening is that I'm no longer reading a letter every day. I think the last letter I read was on October 14th or something like that. Or no, I think it was like October 14th there was a letter, and then we skipped ahead till October 25th. So that's kind of like the time gaps you're getting, and then you're maybe only getting a paragraph or 2 or 3 of a letter. So it's definitely dragging out the ending, but I'm okay with the way that it's ending and the way that reading the book in this fashion has slowed down the end of it. It feels kind of realistic, and like the characters have less and less to say to each other, which is appropriate for what's happening in the book at this time. I am definitely looking forward to finishing this in December, and it'll be interesting to see what my final thoughts and rating is on this book. So now it's time to get into the wrap up for the month of October, where I just go over how the month went. So I will put up a little graphic on the screen for you, and I'm just going to be looking at it on my computer over here. I read 10 books in the month of October, and I'm pretty sure those are just the 10 books that I finished, and I'll talk about that in a second. I did read a total of 3,353 pages, and that does include the pages that I read in Clarissa, which this month really didn't add up to that many. I think it was maybe just 10 pages total, and I'm really happy with my average rating this month. It was 4.24, and I will show you a graphic in a second to show you how that broke down amongst all the books that I read, but it was a really good reading month for me. There were a variety of different countries that I read. I don't always talk about that map graphic that I show on there, but yeah, I am working through quite a few countries, and that map does represent all the books that I've read so far this year. No, That's not true. That map is actually generated by the tracker that I'm using for HRCYED 2.0. So that actually just represents all the countries that I've read from since July when HRCYED 2.0 started, just to clarify where those colors are coming from. And then the bar graph that is at the very bottom of the page is showing sort of a breakdown of all the books that I have read this entire year. And so you can see I've already started some of my November reads. But one of the things that I'm happy with that bar graph, and I feel like that lines up with my experience of this month, is that this is my highest reading month so far this quarter, or at least in the last 3 months. So both in August and September, I really did not read as many books as I had been earlier in the year, and I really started to feel it by the end of September. And so I'm happy that October was kind of a comeback month for me. Is there anything else that I want to tell you about that? Oh yes, I should mention that all of these stats don't necessarily represent what I'm doing in real time. They more represent what I'm talking to you about in my videos on Saturdays. So if you don't know, every Saturday I do a weekly reading wrap up where I share with you books that I have recently read, and I do short book reviews on them, and sometimes I will show you what I'm reading next. Those videos always come out about a week or two after I've actually finished reading the books. So just to keep us from being confused, I'm actually matching my monthly reading wrap up to just the books that I've talked about in those videos that have come out in that specific month. So October's wrap up is just about the books that are in October's videos, despite the fact that at the time I'm filming this, I am a good week or two into reading books that I won't be talking about until November. So I occasionally mention this. Hopefully it's not confusing. In the long run, it doesn't really matter. And yeah, let me talk to you about some of the books that aren't in this set of 10. I have 3 here, and these are books that I didn't read for a variety of different reasons. And I just mentioned these because they are books, if you saw my last TBR video, that I mentioned in there. And I do want to keep mentioning what happens to those books because I am trying to work on every single book that I put on a TBR to at least decide whether or not I want to read it. So one of the books is White Cat, Black Dog. This was a book club pick for my local in-person book club that I attend at a local bookstore. This was the pick for October. We actually just discussed this book last night as of the day that I'm filming this. And I didn't actually finish this book. I kind of softy enough'd it. I read the first 3 or 4 stories in it because it is a short story fantasy collection. It is the stories in here are based off of the Grimm brothers fairy tales, more or less so. Anyway, I read like the first 3 or 4 stories in here, felt like they were really a mixed bag, and also discovered that none of them really felt like they had a particular theme or a message or a point to them. And I have recently discovered that that is something that I love in books. I love to explore the themes and the message, even if sometimes I don't agree with them. And I tend to find it more frustrating if a book doesn't have that. That doesn't mean the book doesn't have value. It's just a personal preference. Some people really like reading just to be entertained. And if that's you, you might like this book more than I did. And that turned out to be a factor in the book discussion. A lot of the people in the book club who really enjoyed this book, they liked it because they did find the stories entertaining. And I would agree with them. The stories in and of themselves were fairly entertaining. However, just about every single person there did say that they also found there was no point or meaning or message in any of them. And, you know, it kind of varied by person as to how much that bothered them. And so while I was hoping that attending book club would encourage me to finish the book, I found by the end of the discussion where we talked a little bit about all of them, and then most everybody said that the last couple of stories in here were their least favorite, I decided to just go ahead and softy enough this book. So I will not be coming back to it. There were 2 books on my previous TBR that I did not read at all. One of them is an instance of the finger post. I was actually really looking forward to this, and I will probably still read this book at some point, but I'm most likely going to get it out of my library, and the reason is I discovered I'm actually allergic to this addition to it. Not by touching it, don't worry. It's actually it's fairly dusty is what I'm realizing. is a used book. I did buy it used, thankfully not for a lot of money. I think for like 75 cents or something like that, or it might have even been from a library. I don't recall, like a library like bag of book sale. Um, Either way, I can't get this book close enough to me for a long enough period of time to read it, so I'm gonna have to unhaul it. I know it's something that I can get at my library. I actually see used copies of it all the time, so at some point, if I really find myself desperately wanting to read it, I will pick it up then. And then the final book I ended up deciding not to read is Palmares. Thank you to everybody who commented on the video that I made with my TBR showing that I was going to read this. I had a couple of people comment on this and saying that this book was kind of problematic. It took a lot of research, interestingly enough, for me to discover what was problematic about it. That book is coming off my TBR and will be unhauled. It was one that I wasn't sure I wanted to read anyway, so I was glad to have that feedback and go from there. If you want to know more about the specifics that I found, that kind of thing, sorry, I'm being kind of vague. I just don't want to make the whole video about that. You can comment below and I can direct you to some of the sources that I found that explain it in detail so that it made sense to me. Another thing I wanted to talk about in wrapping up the month is I did mention that there were 10 books that I read and finished. So I will put those 10 books up on the screen for you so that you can see what those were. And I will talk about each of them briefly. If you want a deeper discussion about each of these books, I recommend looking at my weekly reading wrap-ups, and I will list the playlist for that below. So yeah, you can see by looking at the graphic here that I really did have a really good reading month. I did have the one DNF. There was a question mark there because at the time I made this graphic, I wasn't sure if I was going to DNF White Cat, Black Dog, but I did end up doing that. I had 3 5-star books this month. I really enjoyed all of those for very different reasons, and in a lot of ways they were kind of very different books, even though 2 of them were science fiction. I had 3 4.5-star books, which was really exciting, and I should mention that with The Grapes of Wrath, I do not have that reviewed in a weekly reading wrap-up because I did that as a buddy read, and I will talk about that in a little bit. That's everything that I have to say about my monthly wrap up. So now I'm going to do some quick updates on the different reading challenges that I'm doing. I am doing HRCYED 2.0 this year. I did HRCYED last year, and so I'm now doing round 2 basically. And I will show my bingo board that I have updated with how I'm doing. I have currently completed 5 of the different challenges on there. The new one for this month, I believe, is the subgenres of choice. The genre that I am doing is literary fiction, and so I had to read, I think it's 6 different books in subgenres of that, so I did complete that. And I think everything else on there was already on there from previous months, but hopefully while I'm talking, I'm showing you any graphics and details I have on those other challenges. So that's kind of how it's going. I feel like in November, I'm about to crash and burn with HRCYED because basically one of the things you have to do for this challenge is every single month, it starts in July and ends in July, and every single month you need to read a new release. This was my Achilles heel in round 1. I'm pretty sure it's going to be what takes me out in round 2. Now, this is just for fun, but I am interested in seeing how far I can go before I fail. And yeah, let's see. The last new release I read that was within 60 days of the book being released was in the month of August, which means as of right now, I still need to read a new release from September. I have 60 days to do that from the date it was released. So if I can find a book that was released in the end of September, I will technically have until the end of November to read it. Thank you, Sarah, for reminding me that. I still don't think that's going to happen because I know what books were released towards the end of September, and there's none of them that I really feel like reading. And then even if I somehow manage to force one of those onto my reading schedule or just into my life in general, that still leaves October where I kind of feel the same way. So yeah, I don't know if this is going to happen. I've thought about switching to doing new in paperback instead of just flat out new releases because I do like paperbacks better anyway. and I'm still not that thrilled about it. I honestly just don't read a lot of new releases, especially when they're first released. I don't feel like there's a lot of books that are published every year that I would want to read. And certainly not 12 of them. I think really what it comes down to is there's certain books that I just need to sit with longer and think about whether I want to read them. And I don't know, I'm picky. I don't know what else to say about that. So we'll see. But if in November's wrap up, I end up saying that I failed, don't be surprised. Okay, I did mention John Steinbeck at one point, so let me go on to the next reading challenge that I'm doing, and that is my own reading challenge, which is the Ultimate High School Required Reading Challenge. This is a challenge that I am doing with my bookish bestie, Alex. We are working our way through rereading things that were on a required reading list for high school. So she has come up with a list for herself. I've come up with a list of my own books, and we're basically alternating back and forth reading off of each other's list. We've come up with a whole report card, and we're giving ourselves a grade for each assignment. And it's been a mixed bag. It's been a mixed bag. So in the month of October, we read, did we read it in October? I don't know. But we discussed in the month of October The Grapes of Wrath. This was a book that was off of Alex's high school required reading list. And we actually changed the format of how we were doing this. We were having live discussions with each other and then editing them and putting those up as a recording. In October, we actually did a live discussion of that. We really enjoyed that. A couple of you came on while we were live discussing it and joined in the conversation, and that was a lot of fun. So we have decided for now to keep it in that format. And so if you would like to hear our thoughts on The Grapes of Wrath, you can go and watch that video, but I will put up on the screen our current report card so you can see the grade that we ended up giving The Grapes of Wrath. It was definitely not a book that we found was free of problems, but we do spend quite a bit of time in that video talking about it, so you can go and watch that if you like. I am really enjoying doing this reading challenge. Our next book is Great Expectations, which is also the book club read for my book club. So guess what, member book clubs, it's going to be sort of public and live this month. We are going to, once again, Alex and I host the book discussion for this. My book club members will be welcome, but it's going to be a live discussion that will be open to everybody. So if you have been curious about how my book club works, that kind of thing, typically we've been having it on Zoom, but I have discussed with a couple of members about the idea of switching to a live stream so that people who can't make it can watch back the recording, and I'm pretty sure that's what I'm going to do. But just for the month of November, it will actually be a live discussion with Alex. So that will be fun. Once we have finished reading the book, and then have a date set for the live, there will be an announcement and community posts and that kind of thing for that, so make sure to keep an eye out for that. So if you've ever thought of reading Great Expectations, now's a great time to do it, because we will be discussing it and it will be really fun and really interesting. I think this will also be Alex's first Charles Dickens, so that's always exciting. And then I have one final update to do, and that is for TBR Harvest. So I did participate in TBR Harvest for 2025. This is a reading challenge that is hosted by Leandra at the TBR Zero. I will click her announcement video and that kind of thing below. And I was honored to have a spot on her bingo board and be the first person whose prompt was pulled. So sorry, not sorry if you didn't like the fact that it was a classic. By now, you should know that. If not, you're missing bingo card numbers. Anyway, I actually didn't do the bingo card for this. There were 3 different options of how to participate in TBR Harvest. There was a bingo board, as I mentioned. There was a regular game board that you could travel around. And then there was a Tomes and Tombs page. And that is the one that I chose to do. There were multiple ways to go about doing this, but I just decided to read whatever I was going to read during the month of October and see how many spaces I could knock off by doing that. So basically, for each tombstone, there was a prompt that was related to it, and it was a cover challenge. So you needed to basically kind of do a scavenger hunt and find the different items on the cover of whatever book you were reading, and you could either read the book or you could just see if you had a book that had that on the cover. I ended up just solely doing read the books, and so I'm going to talk about and show you what I did, how I did, something along those lines. So real quickly, I'm just going to go ahead and pop up on the screen my finished tombstone board. So I have little paint splatters on all the tombstones that I was able to hit, which in some ways sounds like really horrible because I'm like, I don't know, what am I imagining? Shooting a paint gun at a tombstone? We're not going to think about it. It was too hard for me to digitally color these in, so I just wanted a general color to indicate that that was a spot that I hit, that I targeted, that I finished, so don't be offended. Yeah, so anyway, I'm going to real quickly let you know which of the cover challenges that I met, and if I can, off the top of my head, figure out what books go with them, I will real briefly show you those as well. All right, so let's go ahead and get going. I have a whole bunch of books over here. I have the Goldfinch over here, which is not a book that I read in October, so that's precariously placed down in a bag on the floor, and I'm pretty sure it's going to fall over while I'm filming, but we're just going to go ahead. The first one I needed was a book that was black or had black on the covers. For number 3, I needed a book with leaf or leaves on it. Number 4 was a book with an animal on the cover. That was White Cat, Black Dog. It even has an animal title and name, but there is a puppy on the cover. Number 5, I needed to read a book that had stars on it. I also needed a book for number 8 that had orange on the cover, and clearly perfume works for that. Did I even mention reading perfume? Yeah, it was, you saw the graphic that I had earlier. Number 11, a cover with the night sky. I went with To Be Taught If Fortunate again because the night sky really is just outer space. So I felt like that counted. Maybe that's cheating, but I went with it anyway. Number 15 was a weapon. Oddly enough, Romeo and or Juliet does have a android of some sort using a weapon on it. Don't ask, you need to read it to understand. Number 16 is the color red. Again, I could do perfume or Juliet. Number 18 was a book with eyes. At first, I wasn't sure if I had a book with eyes on it, but in this case, I will show you the book, which is my edition of the Valkyries. There is actually a girl with eyes on the cover. But you could also do Romeo and or Juliet, and also The Hearing Trumpet. Number 2, I needed a book whose cover is green or has green on it. You could do The Grapes of Wrath. I feel like Romeo and Juliet, like my actual color, this is a shade of green more than it is a shade of blue. I'm pretty sure in the graphic it looks more blue than it does in real life. Number 21 was a non-human on the cover. Again, White Cat, Black Dog would work. The Hearing Trumpet would work because I don't know what that is on the cover of it. Romeo and or Juliet with that android type figure would work, as would, there's another book on there. If I can think of what it is, I'll circle it in the graphic. Number 22 was just the opposite. It needed to be a human on the cover. That is most of all the other books. Number 23 needed to have a road or path on the cover. The Grapes of Wrath worked really well for that. In fact, a road is a pretty prominent theme throughout the book, or motif rather. Number 24 needed to be a book with purple on the cover. It's probably hard to see in the graphic, but To Be Taught If Fortunate, there is some purple on there, including the title, and there's also a bit of purple right here on the cover of The Hearing Trumpet. And number 28, the final one, is a book with stripes. And for that, I went with perfume. If you can kind of see, there's stripes here, and there is kind of stripes here. I don't know how well that's going to show up on camera, but it is kind of stripy. It's actually almost a plaid kind of pattern going on there, but I'm counting it as stripes because that gets me another spot off of Tomes and Tombs. Altogether, I got 15 out of 31 spots, which I feel like is pretty good. And if you're wondering how I got 15 spots and only read 10 books, it's because you can double up, and I did. So, yeah, there were definitely some on here that stood no chance, and there were others on here that I would have gotten if I had read Pelmaris in an instance of the finger post. But oh well to that. And did I count White Cat, Black Dog, even though I soft DNF'd the book? Yes, I did, and I'm only figuring that out now, so oh well. I was happy to participate in this. This is sort of my favorite way to do readathons, which is just read whatever I was going to read anyway and just see how I do, because they're just for fun anyhow. So that is it for this month. I feel like that was a whole lot to go through, but hopefully you followed me along. If you stayed until the end, thank you so much. You will probably be seeing this on or around Halloween, or maybe just after it. Are we already in November when you're seeing this? I don't know. But it is sweater weather, so I'm excited about that, even though it's cold. I'm probably gonna go and get a hot drink. If you have stayed until this very last moment, I'm gonna be one of those cool people that tells you to leave an emoji. So leave an emoji of a hot drink or a sweater. And let me know how your month of reading went, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.